more in there. It's a specific gravity chart, different materials with wax as number one, with 1 pound, and other metals with reference to wax. So what I want you guys to do is weigh your waxes before you dip them. If several of you are ready today, great. Before you do that, get the scale out that we used for plaster and weigh them, even if it's pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but write that down in your sketchbook, and then at some point let me know. Because we need to, if you're thinking about casting your piece in bronze or casting in aluminum, I need to use those numbers with this chart to figure out how much metal we need. I'm going to be going to Biltmore Iron and Metal to get more metal, and I just want to make sure we have enough for our pour in a couple of weeks. So again, please, step number one, before even step number one, is weigh your wax. Yes, you do not have to pay for the pour, the gate, and the vents and all that. That'll get cut off. You can weigh it when you're completely done, and then only pay for that material. But I need to know how much metal we're going to need for these casts to begin with. So weigh your waxes, write that down in your sketchbook before you dip it. Yeah? Awesome. Okay, so step number one is done. So you come back in, and this is your piece. You want to make sure it's completely dry. Something else I did point out a minute ago is there's a switch on the wall which turns on the power to the fan right here. And it's a 1-speed, it turns on. It takes a while to really get kicked up. And when we have a lot of dippings in here, it's going to be nice to just have them drying out. But it instructs you for step number one between step number 1 and 2 not to use fans and forced air. Because what happens is that first step can dry too quickly and shrink and crack and then come off the piece. So I think for these first steps, let's leave the fan off. But if lots of you have gotten through step number 1 and people are moving on to step number 2, and you want them to dry out so you can move on to the next step, you can turn on the fan. That's totally fine. It can be left on all night. It's not something we have to turn off, but yeah, so that's the switch right there. Something else I've noticed, and pass this around and look on the inside, you'll see that some of the slurry. So I did this yesterday before I left. I left around 5. The outside is completely dry, and a lot of the inside's dry. But from how it sat and the dip, there was a pool of the slurry that just sat there, and as I picked it up and tipped it around, that wet slurry is now moving around in there. You really want your shell, your slurry to dry between coats. It has to dry between coats. You don't want to lock moisture in between the layers. That can be detrimental down the road. And so because this is just a demo, I'm going to move on to step number 2 to show you the process. But if you pick up your piece and it looks like that, you'll need to tip it over and make sure it completely dries in between coats, period. It has to dry in between coats, okay? But like I said, because of it's a demo and I want to get through the demo, I'm going to move on. But if your piece has a lot of cavities on the inside, you may, for this first step, and maybe for subsequent steps, you may have to come in and tip it upside down or tip it a different way to make sure it's drying properly. But this piece, it's going to be just fine. This little dip right in here in the dish, I don't think it's going to pose much of a problem. It's going to dry just fine. But rather than it sitting like this, because enough could sit in the dip there to prevent drying. But thinking about some of y'all's pieces, like the inside of the Buddha and even your piece, all those little spots in there, you may just come in. If you guys are going to dip today, maybe at the end of the day, you just come in or at the beginning of class and just tip it one way so that it keeps moving in there and drying. All right. So once it's completely dry, step number 2, you don't have the alcohol, but you have the pre-wet. So this container, like I said, is going to have the pre-wet. And if it gets low, completely out, it's just full of junk, it needs to be strained, just let me know. But I think it's going to be good for most of these first steps. If anything, like I said, it'll get low enough, I'll have to pour some more in there. It's in the wax room. It's something that I can instruct you through email, through text message. I don't necessarily have to be here. I can show you guys how to do it, or tell you guys how to do it. But what you don't want to do is, I guess with a piece like this, I can do it right over the actual container. If yours is small enough to not need the tray, this is totally fine. This will eventually become so, filled with bits of, eggshell and whatnot and stucco, and eventually it'll have to get thrown out. So it's okay to do it right over the container. But if your piece is big enough that it doesn't fit and it's dripping off the side, then do it over one of the trays. Okay. And actually, I'll do it over the tray just to try to be, you know, efficient with your pouring. Like you pour a little bit in there, kind of mix it around, pour it out. All right. That's all it is. Pretty wet. Special. And in this, if there was a lot more, most of y'all's pieces are bigger than this, you would just take the tray and pour it back into the container, and then rinse this out. Okay. So from here, I'm going to go to the slurry, but before I do that, I'm going to get my bin of stucco ready underneath the bin. Oh yeah, I gotta put my gloves back on. I'm notorious for taking the gloves off and keeping them off. So once your piece has been pre-wetted, then you go back to the slurry. Same sort of process, making sure the slurry gets everywhere. And it's going to go into what the advanced sculpture students affectionately call the cat litter, the bins of cat litter. Not so much the fine, but the number 2 and the number 3 definitely resemble cat litter. So you can see where I'm really trying not to be super aggressive with the stucco, because I'm not wearing a respirator and you guys aren't either. I do have the vent directly over what I'm doing, and so it's all going up there. But if I really kick up this cat litter stucco, it can, you know, escape the side here and come up. So try your best to not do that. But I'm making sure that I'm getting it inside this piece too. So thinking about the entire surface of your piece, right? You want to make sure that you get the stucco on everything, and don't do it quickly. Do it in several passes. The more you touch the wet slurry, it's gonna move off the piece, and that's okay. So be as gentle as possible, but also be as thorough as possible. And then at some point, you're going to feel good with the amount done. Go set it on the shelves to dry. From here, you know, these chunks right here could go back into the bed of stucco, but really it's better for it to just go into the wash bucket at this point. And the reason I say that is because those bins have to be sifted out regularly. Hopefully not during our process, but before this started the other day, I came in and I sifted all these bins. You know, chunks of the slurry get in there and they just have to get sifted out. So that is a true fine, this is a true medium, and that's a true coarse. Of course, we could take the chunks and put it in the coarse and be more efficient that way, and sometimes we do that, but it's okay to just immediately rinse your hands. And then at that point, you're done with step number 2, so you can close that back up, roll it out of the way. Oh yeah, we got this guy I'm going to clean out. Don't leave this in here. Can't think what else. Top to the pre-wet, we'll pour the pre-wet back in there, we'll rinse everything out. Yeah. Actually, before I do this, is anybody ready to dip right now? Yeah, go ahead and stop it.